Okay, welcome back to another eagerly anticipated portion of the American Hot Rod Association Drag Racing History Channel. This is the one we've been promising for a while.
We should just call this the Funny Car Experience it's like this is what, number 4, number 5
right,
on
as
Funny
we
Cars.
play, Jimmy music in the background with a bunch of flowers and Deadhead music. And
I think we left off the last time with like the 1970 cars, that evolution where the chassis got narrower, lower,
more purpose-built, right? Instead of being like a regular car, they got rid of some of the regular car aspects and became the more purpose-built funny car.
Right. So 71, 72 is where that started. And that's where things became really interesting, because you had like a divergence in the funny car population. You had the people on the one hand who took it like, and an example of that would be like Don Perdon, who took the funny car thing as a very serious racing machine along the lines of, let's say, a Top Fuel dragster.
Right.
And then you had the circus performers. You had the Jungle Jim Liebermans and the match race madness days, which in my mind was the epitome of the whole.
Well, and that's probably where the divergence actually begins. If you think about it, because you have your full-on race machine, the wins are better than the dollars, right? Then you had the match race guys that were like, we're out for the cash, and this is a lot of fun, and we're going to throw together junk just to make it work.
But you got to realize the amount of money that was at stake for those guys. See,
right.
The guys who chose to go the professional route, NHRA, AHRA, IHRA, right, and go chase for points and corporate money and so on and so forth. These were seriously hardcore people, but they weren't making nearly as much as the match race guys were.
Oh, for sure.
Because at this period of time, the very early 1970s, funny cars were all, it was a cultural phenomenon.
Right.
People, the general public was aware of funny car racing. Radio commercials all over the country. Sunday, right?
Right, exactly. And you also had your corporate sponsors were aware just as much. Your Coca-Cola cavalcade of funny cars, right?
Yeah, well, it actually started in the 60s. And then kind of waned as it went into the 70s. The Coca-Cola cavalcade was active in the Midwest until around 1979 or so.
Okay.
But for the most part, it was independent tracks, booking in independent cars, and if you run a match race car at this period of time, from like, let's say the very early 1970s until 1984, 1985 was really kind of the end of it. But if you were running a match race car, you could run this thing 2 or 3 times a week and get a guaranteed purse. See, that's a lot of people aren't familiar with what match racing is. Match racing is where a track will pay 4 cars, 6 cars, 8 cars, 16 cars, whatever number it happened to be, will pay them to just show up and go down the track.
Right.
So in general, it would work like, for instance, you would get, and there were performance guarantees. You had to run a minimum of this to get paid.
Right, and that's a convoluted thing that people aren't quite sure of, because there's so many different facets to it. When it first started, it was guaranteed you get $1,000 a run or $750 a run, right? Then the match race, they would bring in a ton of spectators, and the place would make bank, right? Well, and that's the way it's supposed to work.
And
in
the
reality,
races would sell T-shirts,
right,
and everything that they get their hands on.
And their merch was their own. Whatever they made out of their trailer was their own. That's where guys started selling parts off. When they blow stuff up, it was worth nothing. And here's a piston. I'll tell you with my autograph on it. People would buy it up. But it then got to so much leverage that you got guaranteed tow money if you even showed up in the gate, right? Because it costs so much money to run one of these things that these guys were eating Twinkies and living on, beans.
When we were doing the match race thing in the 80s, you had to have these guarantees. Like, for instance, we had rain money. If it rains, we got to tow 600 miles.
Right, you got $200-300 in fuel already going there,
right,
and you haven't even unloaded the car.
Oh, please! The expenses of running a car like that are they're pretty intense.
Right.
But generally speaking, a match race would be a promoter would bring in, let's just say, 4 cars, and they would guarantee each car, let's say, $1,500 a run, which was about between $1,000 and $1,500 a run in the early 70s, the middle 70s. That was about right. They would grade it on, your run is, you have to make it past whatever point it is, right? So let's just say you only go 300 feet, right? Well, then you'll get paid for half the run, right? and then they would throw
Or they'd say you got
bonuses in there.
two passes in there. You get paid X dollars. If you do a third pass, this is extra dollars.
Well, that was the Chicago style match racing.
Right.
So a lot of different tracks had different formats. What they did with match racing, and the thing that you have to understand in match racing is that nobody really cares who wins or loses as long as
the show
go home right with the same basic car that we started out with. That's what's important, and the cash, of course. But the Chicago style match race, which was prominent on the East Coast, and then eventually pretty much everybody adopted it, was you would have, let's say, 10 cars. Okay, so all 10 cars would make the first run and get paid for their first run.
Right. Well, generally, you had to have at least one or two big names in there in 10 cars. Right, so it might be a lot of local guys.
Well, that was the AHRA. See, what the AHRA used to do is they would actually seed the field. They would pay, let's say, Prudhomme, McEwen, Lieberman. They would pick like 4 or 5 cars. There would be headliner cars, and they would pay them as if it was a match race, but they would actually incorporate them into the race itself. Okay. So I know there's a lot of controversy about that. People weren't crazy about that idea.
Right, because it's like you're rigging the game.
You're rigging the game.
Yeah.
But the Chicago style match race was the prominent thing. So you'd have 10 cars, everybody go out and make the first run. And the low ET from the first run would be the winner of that round. Then all 10 cars would come back out again and make another run. And then the low ET from that round would be the winner of that round.
Right.
If the winner of the second round was the same as the winner of the first round, they would take the number 2 ET from the second round. And then those 2 cars would come back for the third round final, and that would be declared the winner. And it didn't matter whether you won or lost. You got the same amount of money. You got down the track, you got the same amount of money.
Yeah, you got tow money and show up money and however many passes money.
Right. Every once in a while, a track owner would throw a bonus in, but you didn't really have to because the car had to get paid to make a run. Now, at that point, the rich guys, the ones who were independently wealthy, they could care less about match racing. They wanted national event notoriety or glory.
Right.
Or they want to
low ET or national records and stuff like that.
Right. Where the common working guy, people like you or I, we'd team up and we put a funny car together. We could care less about happening to the national event thing.
We're never going to make that.
It doesn't matter.
Let's go match race.
Yeah, we're here to make some money, right? This is a business. So we'd put a car together, put a press kit, and the press kit was just like a picture of the car and a business card with a contact number, and then we would go out and we would go match. We'd book ourselves into as many different races as we could, get paid, and I was in on the very, very end of the match race era. We're both the funny car and the dragster, and we actually did pretty good. We couldn't run the same number of times, same amount of times that the guys in the 70s did, because there were that many more tracks and that many more events in like the middle 70s. When you got to the 80s, instead of being able to run 2, 3, 4 times a week, we could run once a week, once every other week. And the pay was such, we used to get paid $3,000 a run. For the top field. It was the last pay structure that we had was $3,000 a run. And they would book us in against like Shirley Muldowney. So
right,
and that was the big thing, because they would book her in as the name, right? But now she needed to have something in the other lane.
Right,
so
right.
For a while,
so you guys became the Rocky event. You're like, ooh, let's take out Shirley. Right?
Yeah, well, no, we didn't really care. We were getting paid. It didn't make any difference. And every once in a while, we would nip her,
Right.
But that's besides the point. The funny car thing, like I said, at that point in the 1970s, was going off in these 2 different directions. The high science favored the national event cars. So all of the development work that was being done in terms of clutches, blowers. See, it was at this point that the stripped blowers started to show up. Because previous to that, they were running just regular GMC blowers. They would hard anodize the rotors and send it. And
you're talking about when they started putting the Teflon strips inside.
Yes.
So they could actually build some boost.
Right. That was all product of funny car racing in the middle 1970s. The fuel pumps started getting bigger and bigger and overdriving them, because now the more you overdrive it, the more fuel you put in there,
the more power it makes.
The faster it goes.
Yeah.
So they went off into 2 different directions. And then you had the middle ground racers. You had the serious hardcore professionals who could care less about match racing, and then you had the circus performers that, I'm just going to go do a half track burnout, puke my stuff all over the track, get paid, go home, buy some more hand-me-down stuff, and go.
Yeah, the middle of the road guy would be like equivalent to like the park and start cars in NASCAR?
Well, the middle of the road guy was a classic example of the middle of the road guy. Was a fellow I worked for years on and off, and he taught me a lot. His name was Jerry Caminito. Ran a car called the Blue Thunder.
Okay.
Right. He was a crash and burn king. He crashed and burned a lot of stuff. Right.
Okay.
Including one incident in Memphis, which is like famous. At the time, it was the fastest high-speed crash in the history of drag racing.
Okay.
You could Google it. There's video of it. But anyway, I worked for Jerry on and off for years. He was an amazingly capable person. Working with very limited budget.
Right.
So, make a long story short, Jerry, the pattern with him was he would go and run 2, 3, 4 match races, take that money, and then go to a national event.
And try to qualify.
Right. Now, the thing with running a national event, and this was like the catch, okay? You qualified for a national event, you got $6,500, which was first round loser money.
Right.
And this is in the 1980s.
Oh, so it's double of essentially your match race.
Well, yeah. If you went to a match race, you got guaranteed 2 runs. You were going to get $3,000 a run for $6,000.
Right.
You go first round loser money. You're going to probably make 2 qualifying runs, and you're going to get.
Oh, so it's actually about the same money.
It worked out to be about the same. But the catch with running a national event was that if you made it to the second round, let's just say it cost you $1,500 a run to run the car, which is about what it costs when you talk about fuel, oil, plugs, amortization on clutch, tires, pistons, rings, all this stuff. Because let's say it cost you $1,500 to make a run. If you got paid your $6,500 first round loser money, it paid for your qualifying runs and it paid for your first run on the track. But if you made it to the second run, well, there was only like another $1,000. So if you win the first round, you actually lose money.
Yeah.
So it was a very big what do you call it, like a strategy to go to a national event, make a couple of qualifying runs, sell some T-shirts Friday and Saturday night.
Right, and then go on first round. Right?
And then just deliberately like just blow the tires off in the first round so you don't hurt anything. Because as long as you staged the car, you got paid. As long as you took the green light, I should say, you got paid.
Well, actually, it wouldn't mean because you could take. Well, yeah, technically, you would take the green light if you red light, but just go up there and completely just burn out through the lights and just drive it right back to the trailer.
I'll tell a quick story. I'm not even going to mention. I won't mention the name of the car. There was a guy that I worked with. We were actually very tight. We partnered up on a couple of things. There was a guy I worked with that had a low budget funny car, and ran the East Coast. A lot of match races, and then we would go to the national events and give it a shot. So we go to Englishtown, right, and qualifying Friday and Saturday, we made 3 runs that were in the 570s. We qualified, right, and we made 3 clean runs that were in the 570s. So, which at the time, a 540 was like 530 was hitter. You know what I mean? Like put you right in the middle.
Right
in contention. But anyway. We ran 3 570s in a row, didn't hurt the car. And we were like, let's just put it away. And then we said, nah, we're going good. Let's see if we can get a 69 out of it. So Saturday night, take the car, make the run. It goes like a 572, 573, whatever it was. And at the point of shutdown, the windage tray broke loose. And one of the baffles broke loose in the oil pan. So all of the oil sloshed away from the pickup. Motor's at 8,000 RPM in the lights, and it's unwinding itself, but with no oil, right?
Right.
So it tears everything up. It's Saturday night now. We have to make first round in the morning to get our first round loser money of $6,500. So it's like, no, what do? We got to wipe that motor. We spent all of the money we had making the runs that, to get to where we go. What do we do? So we got the motor out of the car. We got it upside down. It's like midnight or so, 1 o'clock in the morning. And I'm like, we're junk. It's no good. And my partner, my friend says, no, I'll make this work. So he cuts up Coke cans. Okay?
All right.
Because what happened was it spun the main bearing so hard that it gouged out the block. It ate the block. So the strategy was just to start the car, turn the tire like that to do a burnout, stage, and then go. And we had John Force in the first round.
Okay.
And this is on live TV. Okay, it was basically supposed to be broadcast on live TV. It's a harebrained scheme, but it'll work, right? We'll get our $6,500 and then we can regroup later. So we work all night, cutting up Coke cans, fitting it in and epoxying them into the block so we can get the bearing to sit in there, right? Get another crank in there. We got it to rotate like you put a breaker bar on, you get it to rotate like this.
Okay. Yeah, well, it has a lot of power, so it'll rotate itself.
Well, there was no hope of this thing ever making any sort of pass. All right. So sun comes up and we're done. We got it buttoned up. Right, we spun it over. It had like 10 pounds of oil pressure, right, which was like, this will be enough. Right?
Yeah, bare minimum.
This will be enough. The sun's coming up, and I'm like, bro, you're just gonna stage and call and click it. I'm going home. There's no reason for me to stick around with this because we have plenty of people to start the car and do all the other stuff. I'm going home. I'm gonna crash. I'll catch you tomorrow night. So I go home, right, and I crash. I'm sleeping. So I wake up. It's about, 1 o'clock, okay, in the afternoon. And I said, the race is on TV now. Let me see what's going on. And I turn on the TV, and there's our car on fire with my buddy bailing out of the escape hatch.
Like, what in the world is going on? You were supposed to just start it, and that's it.
Exactly. What in God's name just happened here, right? Because the car's in the middle of the track. It's completely engulfed in flames. So what happened was, he would do some unusual things sometimes. So he just spun the tires like this, staged the car, tree comes down, he hits the throttle, and instead of backing off, he realized out of the corner of his eye he didn't see force.
Oh, so he just stayed in it.
So he legged it. He decides to leg it. This thing goes 300 feet, and it has a nuclear meltdown. just everything through the oil pan. And that was the end of that. So, but yeah, that was the typical thing for a match race car, a low budget car, and there were hundreds of them. And that's at that period of time, I was bouncing from car to car to car to car to car because there was still a lot of races, there were still a lot of cars, and I was familiar with every aspect of the operation of the car.
So that driver, he should have been actually in the seat of a national event car. He liked the racing, and he couldn't shut off the businessman side. Or, I mean, he would shut off the businessman side.
No, he was batshit crazy is what it was.
Oh, really?
He was just nuts. He was just nuts, And I loved him. You know what I mean? We fought. I mean, we fought, constantly. Right? But anyway, yeah, that's like the typical low dollar match race experience. Match race guys.
And see, them guys are all gone now. There's hardly anybody at match races.
All gone. It all dried up. So
let's get back to the evolution of it, though, because we're talking about this is where it went sideways from national event level to match racing. But there was so much more that evolved. The bodies evolved. The money involved. The chassis themselves evolved because you lost a lot of the suspension components.
Well, the rear suspension was all gone, as of 1970, right? When we went to the narrower cars. Those Butera cars, the original Butera cars had a lateral link, but those were the only ones. All of the narrow chassis cars were solid mount. The NHRA had a rule: if the car was under 120-inch wheelbase, it had to have a front suspension. Oh, they did away with that rule around 1973 for the funny cars.
And that's what was causing them to have. They leave so good, they look good, but man, are they ill handling.
Well, they weren't that bad. At the 125-inch wheelbase, right? They went pretty good. And then around 1974, the only real evolutionary change that happened from 1970 to, let's say, today's cars. The only real evolutionary change was the relocation of the fuel tank from behind the front axle to in front of the front axle. Okay. And that was because of the overhang rule. You were allowed to have
plus it probably was doing two things. It was adding ballast to the front.
Yes.
Right? And then it was meeting the criteria for the chassis length.
Well, you could get a bigger fuel tank in there because you were limited. You could only get about 8 gallons in front of, behind the axle, because you're between the axle and the motor. You can only get so much, in there. Okay. When they moved it in front of the axle, you could get 10, 12, 14 gallons into these things. They became monster tanks. in a drag race, the front wheels break the beams on the starting line.
Right.
But at the finish line, the first part of the car to get
Right.
to the finish line breaks the beams.
Yeah.
So they allowed X amount of overhang. I don't remember what the exact number of inches was. And so by mounting the tank in front of the axle and then the
clip the
body,
beams.
right, you could get the body that much further out, and the chin spoiler would
Right. And pro stock cars were the ones this was most evident on, was like the pro stock cars. If you see how low slung the fronts were on them,
Right.
it was because as they're doing the burnouts and they stage it on the tires, when they leave and they start getting downforce, it starts pushing the nose down, and they clip it with that extra, I don't know, foot and a half, but it would lower the ET.
Right, of course.
Right, yeah.
So that was the main evolutionary change. From it was really been over 50 years now since the funny car has basically stayed the same configuration. They've added tubes. They've added
Chromoly instead of mild steel, and
well, they've all been chromoly since SEMA 10-1 was the spec, the original spec, and that went into effect in 1970.
really,
Yeah. So from that point, that was SEMA 10-1, which governed all front motored cars. So if it was a funny car, an altered, anything like that, it had to meet the SEMA 10-1.
it had to
And
be
later,
chromoly chassis.
had to be chromoly chassis.
Oh, I did not know that.
Then SEMA gave way to SFI, and 10-1 became 10-1B, 10-1C, 10-1. So SEMA, the SFI 10-1, whatever letter it is designation now, actually has its roots in 1970. So all of the cars had to fit that general criteria. But again, see, I'm talking about the evolution of it. It means that the driver sits approximately here, the rear end is approximately here, the motor is approximately here. Like in other words, like the basic configuration. If you
Right.
would just draw
Nothing's
a
really
picture of the
changed.
cars, nothing's changed. But over the years, they added different supports and mostly in the name of safety.
Right.
They would have to have this diagonal here and this upright here, and they have to have this sleeved here, and so on and so forth.
Right. Well, and most people don't know, like the funny cars, instead of being the 3-point cage, have been the 5-point or 6-point since
forever.
since 69 or 70. Whenever they started doing the tube chassis for them.
Yeah. So, but anyway, that period between 1971 or so until like the end of the match race madness days, 1984, 1985, 1986, was just an amazing period. It was a lot of fun.
Right.
It was a lot of fun. And drag racing, funny car racing was an Ironman contest. It wasn't like regular racing. It's not like you guys can imagine today. Because, okay, so you go to a drag strip and you see like, okay, they're going to service the car in an hour, and they've got like 8 guys on the team, and there's the left cylinder head guy, the right cylinder head guy, the blower guy, there's the clutch guy, there's the diver, right? There's all these people, and they're and they dive in and they turn this thing over in like no time at all. Where we came from with that whole match race thing, it was you
2 guys.
and me,
Yeah.
right? And we're at a match race, and we have 1 hour between rounds, and we have to do all of the work that whole team does,
Right.
and we have to do it with no new parts. It's always
And see, and that's the epitome. There was a picture taken in the pits. I want to say it was like Al Hoffman, right? Al Hoffman has pistons for a top fuel car, and I'm sure it was a cast iron block 426 Hemi. In a sleeve, the old sleeve installer, right? Which
Right.
no one's used since probably 78, maybe, right? And he's standing there, no shirt on, no tent, no nothing, just a car next to his trailer, and I believe it was probably like a chaparral trailer. And he's building the motor, and there's a guy at the bottom. Him and the guy are putting the rods in.
Right.
That's it.
that's it. That's how we would go
Right.
racing.
And I thought that was like, that's the epitome of how it was supposed to be done.
We would during that match race, the match race type of thing. Like I said, you have an hour between rounds. Or an hour and a half. Sometimes they would stretch it out a little bit, depending on how if the track had a curfew or anything like that.
Right.
And we would literally, I cannot tell you how much skin I left on clutch cans, because you would have to, this is how there's no exaggeration, okay? So you finish your run, you go down, you grab, you meet the car, you hook up your tow rope, right? As we're towing the car back, right, somebody is leaning inside the cockpit, taking the covers off the clutch can to try to get some of the heat out of there.
All right.
Because as soon as you get this thing back to the pits now, it's got to go up.
Right, and you're going to be working on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like your clutch is a couple thousand degrees.
You can't touch this stuff, but yet you've got to pull it all apart and get it ready to go.
Right.
It was an Iron Man contest.
Yeah.
And if you manage to get 2 or 3 dates in a row, because like I said, you could run like one Saturday night at this track, Wednesday night at that track, Friday night at that track, and they might be 500 miles apart. And you've got to service this car between every run.
Right, and then load it up and go to the next place and drive there straight, right? And do the same thing.
It was
Sure.
intense.
I'm sure.
It was like people like, why don't you go race cars today? Why don't you get involved in racing today? No.
Yeah. No, I don't understand.
I've
said this a lot, like chocolate cake. You like chocolate cake? No problem. Eat chocolate cake for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You'll be so sick of chocolate cake you won't ever want to see it again.
So, but anyway, that the other interesting evolution that took place during this period of time is funny cars actually became tamer at the same time as they got faster. So there was up until 1985, 1986, when the race pack computer came about, and actually Jerry Caminito's car, I was there working on the very first car that had the very first race pack computer. So, and this was at the Gator Nationals in 1986, maybe 85. 86. Up until that point, people didn't really know what was going on. The tune-up that was in effect up to that point was known as the Star Wars tune-up. Okay, and it was like 68 degrees of mag, right? The pistons were like 200 out, 68 degrees of lead in the mag. Lean, mean, just vicious cars. And you know how you do a plug read after a run?
All right.
Okay. You pull the plugs out and you put them in a rack and you read the plugs. Okay. During the end of that Star Wars tune-up era, the way you knew the engine was running correctly was when you pulled the plug out and it didn't look like a spark plug.
When it was running correctly?
That's how it was running correctly. When you pulled the plugs out, there was no ground strap. There was no electrode. There was no ceramic.
It
was
just burned
nothing.
it off.
Yeah, it was, and then you'd count the rings of heat, right?
Uh-huh.
So you'd look, on the threads,
right?
Well, each one of those threads is a ring,
right?
So you would look for between 3 and 4 rings of heat. But if you took the spark plugs out of the motor and it looked like a spark plug, that cylinder wasn't working hard.
Right. Well, that makes sense. Yeah.
And it would always be number 6. But anyway, during that period of time, cars were violent. They were beautifully violent. They were just crazy. Okay, and like the Blue Max was like that was the epitome of just raw. That car ran the can, 70 degrees of lead. You know what I mean? And it would just right. So it was Dale Armstrong working with Kenny Bernstein realized that the more fuel you put in this thing and the tamer you make it, the faster it'll go. And that all happened around 1980, and that was about the period, 1985, 1986, and that was the period of the Batmobile.
Right.
And that's when really everything changed.
Yeah,
you could never go back from that point.
Yeah, that was a defining period. Right?
Yeah.
But before that, we had, a lot of the evolution stuff, and that was the chassis themselves. That it already happened, right? We already talked about that. Your match racing versus your national events, and then match racing tapered off. Then you had the bodies evolve. So from like 71, they're still looking like a car. Mm-hmm. What about 73 when you said it was, I believe it was Schumacher's Vega.
The Wonder Wagon.
And where it actually, the body hunkered down even further and they created radius wheel wells to clearance the tires.
Well, they had the bubbles over the front tires.
Yeah.
Because it would clear. That's when they started building a lot of rake into the car. Because they actually using the car as a wing and keeping air from getting underneath it.
And tripping the lights.
Right. And that's why funny cars, for a period of time, funny cars were as fast as fuel dragsters. It was just a click off. They weighed a couple 100 pounds more. They were pushing all kinds of extra wind. But they were almost, they were just a tenth of a second off of the top fuel dragsters.
Right.
And that was because they were using the body as the whole body was a wing.
As the rear wing of the dragster. So it was actually more productive because the whole thing is a wing.
To illustrate how that worked during that period of time, there's a picture of Prudhomme in 1972, might be 1972, and it's a picture taken in the lights, like at the 800 to 1,000 foot mark, close to the lights, and the car is standing up like this, and it's on fire. Mm-hmm. Because at that period of time, they hadn't dropped the nose completely into the ground.
So that was the white duster?
a white Duster, or white Barracuda.
Oh, Barracuda.
Barracuda. So they hadn't dropped the nose of the car completely into the ground yet. They hadn't made that wing out of it. And he had an engine explosion, and the fire ate up the oxygen under the car, ate up the air under the car, and allowed more air to get underneath. So basically the fire became
A vacuum.
a vacuum, right? And at that point, the car tried to fly. And from that point on, they dropped the cars even lower, and that's when the chin spoiler started to get really prominent. And that was like a big step in the evolutionary, of the funny car models.
And that's where aerodynamics started to like really start playing a role.
Yeah. 74, 75, 76, that's when they started making allowances for the mini cars, because Vegas and Pintos had been popular, but they were limited to the stock dimensions. So they started making the rules much more liberal to allow the let's say like the Mustang 2 is a perfect example, because no Mustang 2 funny car ever looked like an actual Mustang 2.
Right.
Because the nose was all stretched out.
Seriously elongated, yeah.
Right, yeah. They started allowing all kinds of crazy things. So the cars kind of lost that feel, But in my opinion, those are the most beautiful funny cars of all time.
I'm very partial to like my favorite funny car would be like this, and they weren't my favorite car. Like, what is it, 71 or 2 Chargers where they got the big back on them?
Yep.
But when they were the funny car, gosh, they were beautiful.
The Mini Charger. That was the Mini Charger body. That was one of the first ones that they allowed those modifications to. That was 1973.
Okay.
Yeah, oh no, they were beautiful. And the satellites, the Plymouth satellites were just gorgeous.
Right.
But if you look at the cars from that era, from, who was it? Dale Armstrong's car. He had a satellite, the Alcoholic. He had a double B funny car.
Okay.
Called the Alcoholic. That was just gorgeous. The thing was like waist high.
Super slung.
But that period of time, that era of car from let's say 1974 to around 1982, 1983, the most beautiful cars ever. The Plymouth Arrows.
The Vets actually got really good looking.
The Vets looked pretty good.
Yeah.
I had a couple of friends of mine that had the old, John Force had had a Wendy's sponsorship. The hot and juicy Corvette.
Oh, right.
And I had some friends from the Jersey Shore that bought that setup, and they ran it as the Shore Connection.
Okay.
Nitro funny car. So it was the beautiful cars, incredible era. I don't think anything like that could ever happen again.
I don't think so. And even if you did try to recreate it,
You couldn't.
it would last literally like one race, because the gloves would be off and everybody already knows what to do. See, that's what kills the evolution of every other class that you make these days. It's good for like a week, right? And then if we've already been there, done that. So they take whatever applies and mold it around the rules and have at it. And the next thing you know, it's gone.
Racing in that period of time, if you were a fuel racer, if you were a funny car racer in that period of time, the 1970s into the 1980s, you were a different breed of humanity altogether. Your universe operated in a completely separate environment from everybody else's. Rules did not apply to you. Laws did not apply to you. Physics did not apply to you. Nature did not apply to you. You just did whatever the hell you had to do to get that car to the next round, right? And, the statute of limitations isn't up on, that was the other thing too. There was a lot of because cars are expensive to run,
right?
And a little bit of a mistake can cost you more money than you'll see in 5 years, right?
Yeah.
So there was a lot of shenanigans going on. But at any rate, the match race madness days, the 1970s, 80s funny cars were just awesome. I'm sorry, you guys, if you're too young to have actually been there, I'm sorry, man, because you missed just the most amazing thing ever.
And if you're old enough to have seen it, right? You know exactly what he's talking about. And luckily, that was my childhood, was those years, right? And then now it's like, you could feel the mundane era. I would call it mundane era, because that's where it was just like, about 1990 is where you realized it was just it was no longer the same. It is just walking through the woods and you're like, what is wrong with funny car? It's no longer the same. And that's where the big burnouts started to happen all the time, because you had to put some kind of flair and panache into it.
I worked for a guy named Norm Wilding. He was from England. And he wanted his life dream when he was a kid was to be an American funny car racer. So he did a lot of things in England to gather up the cash to come here to do his thing, and he could never ever go back to England.
Like literally burn every bridge you got.
No, literally, right? Norm was the epitome of funny car racer.
I'm going to make it, yeah.
Yeah, no matter what. Him and he had a guy. I forget the guy's name, but they lived in the truck, and that was it, man. He just lived to go match race, and he was doing pretty good for a little while there. But I was working for him at a match race. I forget where this was, and they had Brent Fanning with the Utter Nonsense car was in the other lane. So there was a little bit of a thing about a burnout contest for this race.
Right.
So both of them decided that's it. This is a burnout. It was the longest. I have never seen they burned out, right? Full throttle burnouts, past the finish line, halfway down the shutoff. I think Brett's nose actually dipped into the sand trap, and then they backed all the way up. Right?
Yeah, without a backup guy or gal or anything.
The funny thing about this was there was no question they won the burnout contest.
Well, and see, Lieberman was where he cut his teeth was match racing with that kind of panache, that kind of flair.
That's all he did.
Right.
He only ran a couple of national events.
Right.
He only won one national event.
Well, and that's what he's known for is those crazy big burnouts and the 65-mile-an-hour backup, right?
Well, this was crazier than anything Jungle ever attempted.
I'm sure.
Right. But anyway, make a long story short, the two cars got all the way back behind the starting line. And now this was like a long period of time to get these things to back up. So I'm trying to figure out, okay, we got to get more fuel into this thing somehow because it's going to run out of fuel, right? But the cars were so wasted by the time they got back they got behind the starting line, and Fanning's car just kind of went poof, 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 poof,
and just died.
Yeah. It was just they completely used up everything on these two burnouts. That was funny car racing.
That's cool. Well, so to summarize everything, that's part 4 that took us up to the Batman era, or the Batmobile era of the Kenny Bernstein, Budweiser King Buick funny car. Right?
Guess what?
What's that?
I don't want to do part 5.
No, we're not going to do part 5.
Because as far as I'm concerned, that was the end.
There was a part 1 and 2 with Steve Magnante that was literally a 2-hour session cut down into 2 35, 40-minute videos. Then there's part 3, which was really well received, and then here is part 4. So thank God we got done with it. The next one's probably going to be what? Pro stock? Heads up super stock, AHRA era.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start. So, thanks again, Tony.
I rambled on for a long time.
I know this was a long video. We got plenty of material to work with here. So make sure you buy some AHRA merch. That's the way we stay in business. And subscribe, like, ring the bell, whatever you call it, the whole 9 yards.
All that stuff. Do it all.
And don't forget to watch Uncle Tony's Garage. Let's see, you just had a video come out yesterday.
Yeah, and we do nothing about funny cars
Nothing.
on that channel.
So we'll see you next time on the AHRA Drag Racing History channel. See you later.